Volume 4 C22. The three concubines, as well as the sons and daughters of Overlord, landed amidst the farms and spoke with trembling mouths. Gather the Quagga, all of them. Our nest is lost, a demon has awakened. Pereiro looked up at the high faces of the dragons which loomed over him in the past like the clap of doom, and now he felt none of the awe he once did for those creatures. They were trembling, shivering, they reeked of fear. I should be savoring this, he thought. But he did not. Because he was wise. If something exists that can terrify even dragons, what chance do we have? The Quagga's greatest chief asked himself that question right away, and the answer came to him as fast as it had been asked. Less than none. But that didn't mean there wasn't knowledge he still needed. What happened? What demon? Where is Lord Overlord? He said it far more strongly than he should have been able to, given the rising fear that set his body quivering enough that his fur shook more than the breeze alone allowed for. I do not know. The eldest of the three concubines replied. He fled? Pereiro couldn't have accepted that. Denial rose in his gut. The eldest son spoke up. No. Father was defeated, and the demon threw him. Very hard. So he hit the mountain wall, and Pereiro clapped his jaw shut when he was interrupted. When through it. He was thrown so hard that he hit the wall of the mountain, crashed through the stone. The demon threw my father into the air, and if he landed, I know not where. Where did it come from? The great rift, or? Another concubine shook her head at the question. No. We saw, the treasury door was open, noises were heard inside. Yaldabaoth spoke of being released from confinement? A sealed object. Something? She shut her ice blue eyes tight. It's all chaos now, but the treasury, something in the dwarven treasury held that thing. Another of the concubines nodded. Is he coming this way, my ladies, my lords? Pereiro asked of them with dread. Something that could kill that dragon and shatter a mountainside? No. He was asking something about the dwarves and their Quagga, and wanting to find something that held his army. One of the seemingly dead dragon lord's daughters said with a shudder. Gather your warriors, all of them. That thing hates you, and dwarves, and we do not know what else. The eldest concubine commanded. If there had been somewhere to go, the Quagga great chief would have disobeyed her. He would have gathered his armies, his people, and simply left. But they had no other range. We can't fight during the day, we're blind, so we're stuck within the underground. No kingdom would take in such numbers. We'll be slaves, worse than what Overlord did with us, for we would have many overlords rather than merely one. We have to do something. So he came to the obvious conclusion. I obey, he said, and whirled on the escort with him. Call all our armies back together, everyone. Now, he roared the order, and the stiff-bodied functionary that had been trapped in a state of fear and awe, turned and fled to obey his chief. Riding into Fierja was something Ainz lacked the descriptives for. The street was indeed clear, which with various dwarves had been using the street only moments before, now standing well out of his way. I feel like I'm on a parade. But a parade that nobody expected, and don't know who is parading, or why, or how they're supposed to feel about it. On the interesting side, it was a remarkable chance to look at how an intact and inhabited dwarven city functioned. The streets were orderly and clean, the glowstones were placed at regular intervals, providing a persistent soft level of light, but what he most noticed was the pungent scent of beer. 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 And more beer. While it was clear they had very different types, the foamy smell was everywhere and inescapable. The dwarves themselves seemed to wear stone tones and darker shades. They had little use, it seemed, for forest colors or greenery. The brightest color they seemed to wear was a burgundy shade of red, and even that was comparatively scarce. Do they not have the dyes to do it, or does it just not fit into their culture? The question seemed trivial, but one thing the salesman in him reminded Ainz of, was that any detail of a culture could have broad implications, far broader than recognizable to the outsider. You should have learned about us before coming with that offensive color. There was nothing he could say to such an assertion. On the upside though, they are in a bad way with the Quagga being aggressive, if what Hegenmil said was true. This may very well be their last real stronghold. The dwarves did seem to be somewhat more haggard than in Zanbaru's memories. War weariness perhaps? It seemed possible. Riding through the city as he did, it still took quite some time to reach the center, well over an hour in fact, with crowds moving aside, but then, strange as it seemed, life resuming behind him before he'd even turned another corner. Pragmatic, no intention of wasting time. The inner office worker told him, and little by little the center of the dwarven government came into view. It said something about the status of the dwarf acting as Ain's herald, that the entire council arrayed itself on the steps, half a dozen dwarves in clothing that was slightly less work-oriented than the others. At least where manual labor was concerned. They didn't wear overalls or thick, heavy boots. They were barrel-chested, and in contrast to the others Ain saw, a little fat. Do their women have beards too, or do they have no women at all? He asked the question with some sudden discomfort. Zanbaru's memory of their nearly uniform appearances seemed to be more accurate than Ain's expected. Other than the colors of their beards and slight variations among the eyes, distinguishing one dwarf from the next was quite hard. At least their clothing is different. Ain's thought as Hegemel came to a stop a few paces behind their herald. Before he could address them, a message came in. "My lord," Demiurge said, "I have taken care of the most powerful of the dragons and sent the others running. I am prepared to enact the next phase of your master plan, but it shames me to admit this, I may need to borrow an item from the treasury." "Of course, Demiurge," Ain's replied. While the thought, plan? Why do they always think I have a plan? Ran through his mind. I am about to speak with the council of the dwarves. I will take lodging here for tonight, then we will speak and I will permit you to explain what you have worked out. Thank you. Thank you, merciful lord. Demiurge replied with deep relief and a sigh Ain's could hear in his head before he killed the connection. He then faced the dwarves who were shifting with visible discomfort. I am King Ain Zulgaun, ruler of the Kingdom of Nazarick. I am here to negotiate. Volume 4 C23. Before them stood the white-robed mage, his glorious golden trim caught the light and magnified it all. Like some marriage between the divine and the sun, a light that made the forges loved by the dwarves appear to be nothing more than a dying candle. The urge to kneel rose from the deepest well of their souls. It wasn't lost on any of them that he said nothing, not right away at least. Allowing us to take him in, and taking control of the conversation by forcing us to feel awkward. A true king immediately takes control. Something the Forge Master recalled hearing somewhere long before, and this one took control by silence and presence alone. When the King of Nazarick spoke, it was only gratitude that the Dwarven Council felt. Negotiate? The eldest of their numbers asked. Yes. Ain's replied with magnanimous king gesture number 7, holding his hand straight out. Trade is a field every king must cultivate. Forgive me, but it seems you have been without that field for far too long. From what I understand, listening to my mount here, he patted Hegemel at the base of the neck, you're in a very bad spot, on the verge of destruction unless I miss my guess. The dwarves' faces did not darken with anger, but they did redden with shame and they looked dejectedly down at the stone beneath their feet. Butter them up a little, make them feel good and they will be more kindly inclined. Ain's told himself, then said, simply put, I'd like to help you. The Kingdom of Nazarick has fond memories of the dwarves, though it seems to have been lost to history. We still remember that you were good partners once. Of course, I am not without needs. But what I want is something it seems you don't value much any longer. I want runecraft. That had the dwarves' attention, their eyes snapped up, and Ain's dismounted from the dragon. His feet hit the ground, and in that moment to one observer, the spot his foot touched became holy. Gaundo Firebeard, like others who watched from the sidelines, heard the king's proclamation of his desire, and his heart flared up like the forge of a smith preparing a masterwork. Runecraft. A mighty king wants my greatest passion. Happiness soared like an eagle in Gondo's soul, but it was joined by absolute bitterness when he saw the confusion it spawned on the faces of the council, even the Forge Master. They don't value my work, our heritage at all. The despondent thought was not a stunning revelation, but never before their bewilderment had it been so blatantly said in his own head before. They were all polite to me, all of them, when I asked for more funding for runecraft research, when I went on about its great advantages. But their polite smiles and offers of beer were just that. A disguise for their indifference. Had they appeared alarmed or defensive, had they spoken up and said no, had they had any other reaction than confusion and bewilderment, things might have been fine. But the last true enthusiast of runecraft could feel only a sense of outrage at his own people, while by contrast the king in white, won over his loyalty in that single statement of desire. A legacy of the past significance of runecraft was that, in every city of the Dwarven Kingdom, near the center of government, one would find runesmiths. And because homes were often passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, the runesmiths continued to reside in the same places as their forefathers and foremothers. For this reason, retired runesmiths who gave up on their craft and grew dispirited, still lived in a part of town where they were present to hear the words of the dragon-riding king. And the runecraft forging fires were lit in their hearts once again. Why? A stunned face and disbelieving tone among the councillors governing the dwarves solidified the bitterness of the runesmiths. Because I believe it has potential, Ein said, his voice booming out, because. He paused and his mind raced for an answer. The earlier lie came to mind, and he recalled something he could use. Perhaps the runesmiths themselves are even in the crowd, he wondered, and reached into his dimensional storage. The dwarves watched him reach into a black void that appeared a short distance away, and from within he drew a sword with 20 runes. Magnificent beyond measure, shining brightly as if it were drawing the soft light of glowstones to its broad face, a pommel of bright white ore, the runes stood out like jewels. Because long ago, you were capable of this. If you still are. Or if you have forgotten your arts, I want to see them live again. Ein's voice carried over the whole open square, and when he finished speaking, he could hear the sucking in of teeth from dozens of people. 20 runes? A lost technique had to have done it. Gaunder knew that immediately. No one had ever done so many. What lies behind the mask? How old is he? Where could he have gotten such a thing? It wasn't lost on the council members either. The power of your art is remembered in ancient Nazarick, the bond our peoples once shared when facing great terrors. Ainz plucked half-remembered phrases from his memory of various stories of lost allies finding one another, and nations that stood together against great threats, mostly Yggdrasil lore, but he held the rapt attention of his audience as he regaled them with what he knew. Now that we have awakened from our long slumber, it seems we were forgotten, our kingdom was gone, but now lives again. We have, in a way, returned, and wish to reforge old bonds in case the threats of old should ever reappear again. As I said once long ago, we must hang together, or we will hang separately. Ainz cleared his throat, but this is not the place for us to negotiate. Should we speak inside? He asked. Why yes, of course. The eldest dwarf said, and the councillors stood aside. But what of your mount? Will he be fine out here or? The forge master showed his pragmatic thinking with the question, and Ainz responded. He likes to read. If you lead him to a library while we settle terms of our relationship, since it may take some time, I'm sure he would be very happy. Ainz patted his mount with a gentle hand, as one would a pup, leading to bug-eyed stares as he showed how tame the dragon was. Of course. Someone lead him to the library. Your Majesty. Join us. Join us inside. The eldest of the councillors said again, and they filed toward the door, with Ainz following after them with measured, steady steps which held every eye of every dwarf present there until the doors closed and cut them off. Volume 4 C24. Yaldabouth was more than pleased with the response of his master. It took time even for him to explore the vast and now empty city. He left the stone charred black in his wake, dark and heavy footsteps that would mar the stone to the end of all ages. All over the city he walked, and while he left his mark indelibly on the unfortunate place, his summoned demons worked tirelessly. Every scrap of treasure belonging to the frost dragons, every single bit of ore or resource he could find down to the last 10-penny nail was ripped free. Well, before it was even done, there stood a pile of treasure and resources so high that it rose like a mountain under the mountain. He tilted his head back and exhaled a burst of flame along with his satisfied noise. Nearby, the demonic summons tilted the last bowls and baskets into place at the base, the clink of coins and metal ingots, as well as abandoned jewelry, rings, cups of silver and gold, plates and statues, even the coal and heat stones. A good haul, particularly with the contents of the treasury. The gate appeared when he called for it, and the many winged and walking minions began emptying the great open area before the treasury. The tumbling sound of the materials did wonders for his temperament. If I show Lord Ainz what I've done, how hard I have worked, he will realize how much we care. Then perhaps he'll never. He could not finish the thought. Foolishness. He said many times he won't leave. He thought, and if he does, it will be purely our fault. which led back to the dreadful thoughts from before. The others don't understand as I do. It means it was all our fault. The other supreme beings left. We failed somehow. I failed somehow. If only we knew the ways we let them down. But we don't. So I must work even harder for the one who stayed. When the mountain within a mountain was removed, all the way to the shelves of the emptied warehouses, all cast through to be sorted in the arena and added to the resources of Nazarick, only then did he move on. Not in search of treasure, but in search of pleasure. As Lord Albert said, all work and no play is unhealthy. And with that, he followed the trail of life carried on the lightest of breezes. Substantial light filled the area thanks to the earlier hole that Olisar Dark made when he was cast through the mountain to his death or slow death. Now it was dark again, and he had somewhere to be. The dwarves and Quagga were still fighting elsewhere. I wonder how long the dwarves would last if my master had not seen some value in their one craft? Not long, months, another year? It was as difficult to say as it was unimportant, but the Quagga did not offer much value beyond their unique mineral consumption skills. Perhaps we can selectively breed the strongest through mineral consumption, equip them with runic weapons and armor, and make a truly useful fighting force. At least useful by this world's pathetic standards. Demiurge thought more about it, the more it made sense. We can't rule everywhere. Local forces are vital for keeping order when spread thin as we are. Have I stumbled upon another part of my master's plan? It seemed a likely scenario, the sort of thing only a truly supreme being could come up with, and again he sighed, I'm so very far behind. If I don't prove myself and at least get a proper glimpse of the summit of his genius, he may leave. Demiurge forced the thought back, and instead, he refocused it. The frustration, the rage, the anguish of Lord Albert's departure, the impotence and inability to speak. Why were our tongues bound back then? Why couldn't we even speak? We were like statues that moved, silent watchers of greatness. If only I could have told him thank you. If only I could have said, Father, if only. If only. If only. The recriminations rampaged through him all the way to his destination, where one of the last dwarven outposts that still held out against the Quagga. Burn, he bellowed as he came into view, cresting the stone rise and his view of the combatants. He pointed toward the pathetic worms and fire came down from on high as if shot straight out of the stone itself. Before him, a wall of stone held dwarves who wielded lightning-enchanted weaponry, great crossbows and heavy axes. Their thick armor clanked and clattered as they killed or wounded the advancing Quagga. Here and there a dwarf fell into the mass of the dark furry creatures where he was torn apart. The armor meant to preserve his life instead preserved his agony, dragging out the moment of his death. The wall of the outpost was not large, no more than 2.5 meters tall, but it was dotted with towers with lightning-charged weapons. By contrast, the Quagga came on unarmored, relying on their thick pelts and natural resistances to secure them against damage. The weight of the Quagga numbers made the outcome a foregone conclusion, with several towers cracked and broken, but it also revealed Quagga foolishness that Yaldabaoth could only feel contempt for. Stupid fools, they bit and tore at the stone from their side. The towers landed on their own warriors. He chose to punish their stupidity first and foremost, with fires over 4,000 degrees incinerating the Quagga in temperatures far greater than their resistance allowed for. The crashing booms of flame and the dying screams of those whose lungs burned inside their own bodies for just a moment before death blessed them with the end of pain. Yaldabaoth gave them time to experience the horror and despair of his coming, a towering demon of fire and stone, with great broad wings and a maw filled with undying flames that gouted past his lips with every word he would speak. True despair is not mere hopelessness. It is the feeling of hope dying like an infant in its mother's arms. He gave that to them, then added his words to the silent moment of raw terror. You fools may have trapped me once in the long ago. But I am free. And I will make you pay. Army or no army. You will suffer. He brought his arms up, and then flung them down towards the forces of both dwarf and Quagga alike. The fire streaked toward both, the flame that hit the Quagga cut through their ranks like a dread scythe, leaving only little piles of ashes in its wake. The ball of flame that struck the dwarven wall exploded, and dwarves were sent screaming as the wall burst, hurtling them with such force that they were dashed against the sky of stone to stain it with a deep red that would last until the mountain became dust. Others simply burned or were crushed by the flying stones that landed on them with a sick, disgusting squelching thump of stone to stone. Fleshy bodies popped like grapes and their armor protected them against death not at all. Panic set in en masse, the dwarves abandoned the walls and fled for the exit, and the Quagga, realizing they had only two choices: to try to withdraw through Yaldabaoth, or after their enemies, chose the latter option. The rout of the dwarves, the aim of the Quagga, became a shared defeat as both sides fled in the same direction, and neither one cared what race ran beside him. Not as long as the demon was left far, far behind. A good start. Yaldabaoth thought with satisfaction as he went within to plunder the outpost the same way in which he'd plundered the former capital.